Hello my friends. The forest that I called home for 2 whole years and that I spent a lot of time in the year leading up to that time has been on fire for the last week. I checked it out and it's pretty devastating actually what's happening there. So the first thing I'm going to show you is a video. This was taken by the local fire service. It's a drone with a thermal imaging camera. You can see the brightly lit areas are clearly fire and it's ripping a massive hole in that forest. So this direction here, I'm going to show you where this is on the map. Now look at the road going centrally up through that picture up towards the top right hand corner. So this gap, you can see this cut through the trees there. You can see it coming down there, this straight line here, and it goes off here. That is the power line, and then it takes a left there and goes off in that direction. You've also got the road coming straight through here, and notice also this track going off on a diagonal in that direction. And here we have the power line coming in at the lower center of the picture, going off in that direction, and here's that track going off on the diagonal. Now I can see that this entire bit of forest here is really burnt, and obviously to the right as well, this whole area here. Well, in this direction, that's sort of the vague area where my my home for 2 years was, so it's possibly been destroyed at this point, but you know, it's underground, so there's also every possibility that the fire would leave it largely untouched. So, you know, I've seen a lot of pictures. Before I saw this video, I didn't really realise how serious the damage was. I'd seen a lot of pictures like this one. That, again, there's that main road, and you can see the fire in the distance, the smoke coming up from the fire. I wasn't quite sure of this location. Doesn't look too bad there, you know. There's a few flames in one of those pictures there. This house on the right, I know exactly where that is. This picture on the right here, the slightly larger one, that's been taken from the top of Woolsbarrow Iron Age Hill Fort. I'll show you where that is on the map. Woolsbarrow Iron Age Hill Fort is there, Woolsbarrow Hill Fort. And that picture is taken looking in this direction, so off to the west. That could be anywhere, the whole forest looks like that. Here they are actually tackling some fires. So the thing is, this heathland environment is actually designed by nature to work with fire. It typically grows on very low nutrient dense soil. It's very sandy soil where this stuff thrives. And you get plants there like heather, and you get plants there like pine. I forget the scientific name for it, but these plants are actually designed to work with fire. Periodically, it's part of a renewal process for these environments to go up in flames, and then they regenerate over the years following that. It's part of the natural life cycle of a heathland. Now the reason this is a forest heathland is because following World War II, when there was obviously widespread devastation to urban areas due to all the bombing, they decided that they didn't want to be so reliant on imported timber. So they decided to plant all over the country with fast-growing, straight-growing pine so that they could have a domestic supply of timber. And back in those days, they hadn't realised the sort of natural and the scientific importance of heathland. It's actually rarer by square mileage than rainforest is. Rainforest is actually much more prevalent in the world than heathland. But obviously there's a much greater diversity and density of species in rainforest. So it wasn't recognised the importance of this stuff. And if you look at this, this is like an overview of the region where I grew up, okay? So here's the wood that I lived in for 2 years. And here's the town that I lived in for something like 8 years. Here there's a lot of heathland on the side of the town. And as the town grew over the years, here's another bit of heathland. This whole area here was built on heathland. They call this part here Camford Heath. And when it was built, I believe in the very early 90s, this was the largest housing development in Europe at the time, and it was built almost entirely onto heathland. Right? They destroyed acres and acres, hectares of it, right? Much more than fire, much more damage than fire would do. But they figured they needed the housing for this expanding town of Poole and Bournemouth, which is actually a massive town. Over here you've got more heathland, and this is a tank training area and a military base built on heathland there. Down here we've got what they call Heartland Moor. That's a place that I did a lot of work back in the day. And here is, again, it's Studland Nature Reserve, heathland area, massive heathland area. And you'll see here, this is the same kind of plantation forestry, straight pines that you see in Wareham Forest. So the forest is artificial, the heathland's natural, the forest is artificial. And thankfully they got to a point where they realised the scientific importance, and all these areas are protected now. It's impossible to develop on them, or very difficult to develop on them now. But it's no surprise. I mean, they reckon that the fire was started by a barbecue. Okay, there's obviously rules against that kind of thing, but you know, people break them, and one of them got carried away, and just because it's been so hot and dry lately, the thing got out of hand. They say, what do they say? They reckon 180 hectares have been burned. They've had something like 150 firefighters at any one time. That's a lot. So the way I see it, as someone who lived in this specific area for 2 years, I saw that there was nature there, but it's heavily suppressed, and it's heavily it's marginalised, right? Because you've got, predominantly because the trees have been planted there, and it has it's completely transformed the landscape. And they do get trucks in there, and they do get logging operations in there, huge machines they use. They don't do it, you know, like a man with a chainsaw. It's done by huge machines that can process a tree in seconds, and they'll do many, many trees. They'll chop an entire area down of mature pines. And then what they do is there are fire breaks cut in the forest anyway. I don't know why this has failed, the fire breaks in this instance, why it's a forest-wide fire. I would imagine because the conditions are just so dry that it's able to cross tracks and it's crossing fire breaks. But they do controlled burns. Once they've felled an area, once they've cleared it, they'll do a controlled burn to clear up the mess at the end, and then allow it to regenerate back to heath. And they also plant new crops on it. You've got to remember that even though this is a natural area, they call it a triple SI, a site of specific scientific or special scientific interest. And even though it is protected, it's also a working crop. I was always under the impression that this place was a refuge. It was a refuge for the animals, like it was a refuge for me. But with the combined effects of the ongoing forestry operations here, and with the daily influx of dog walkers, predominantly dog walkers, that's what most of the human activity in the forest actually is, it suppresses the nature. It keeps it to an absolute minimum. And although there are some pretty big areas of trees where no one really ever ventures, except perhaps hunters looking for the deer, to shoot the deer occasionally, the overall feeling of the forest is that once you've spent a little bit of time there, you realise how not wild this place is. It really isn't. I mean, if you spend your every day living in a town and you're just comparing the park to the forest, well, it does seem a little bit wild then. But when you live there for a little while, whether you're a human who's decided to make that choice, or you're a wild animal, it doesn't really seem that wild. You know, you can always hear the main roads. The light pollution in the night is just devastating, right? Even from this little town that I grew up in, Wareham, which is on the edge of this forest, and Poole, the town I lived in for many years, that's a huge, you know, aura of light pollution on the horizon. The idea that this is some terrible thing that's happened to a beautiful natural place. The way I see it is just like, it's just the final insult, you know, it's just one more insult to Mother Nature, really. But it will resist and it will come back, and I do think that if I was still living there, I'd be in trouble. You know, I would have been in trouble with the lockdown, perhaps, potentially. And then when the fire came, obviously that would have been a spectacular thing to report on from right there on the ground. It would have made some great YouTube, let's say that. But at the same time, had I been detected by the fire crews, which would have been almost, you know, guaranteed, they'd have been like, there's no way you can be in this area, what the hell are you doing? And I couldn't obviously tell them that I live here. So that would have made it really interesting / difficult. So I've just been looking a little bit further into it. I'm on another local media website. It's Wessex FM, which is a local radio station. And they've got an article here: investigation finds probable cause of Wareham forest fire. And there's a picture of 2 disposable barbecues. You know, it doesn't show that it's in the forest. It could be anywhere, but I presume that's a photo they've found the literal site, ground zero of the fire. Police say the fire is not being treated as malicious. Over 190 hectares of forest was burned. They've got this aerial photograph. That's the area they reckon has been burned. But from that drone video I was showing you earlier, yeah, it does kind of correspond. It looks a little bit bigger actually than what's being shown in this image, but let's say that's the epicenter of it. It's a pretty big area. A spokesperson for the fire service says, we believe the cause of the fire to be accidental due to social activity in the forest. We cannot pinpoint the exact cause. We found evidence of multiple disposable barbecues, campfires and glass bottles. So they've obviously searched the area looking for a cause, and they will have found many such things. Probably, you know, people do this stuff. If you're going to do it, tidy up after yourself. Some people are just assholes. Bushcrafters and people who take this stuff kind of seriously, they won't leave without a trace. They will literally cover the fire they left behind. You know, they're only going to leave footprints, literally. You know, part of me was hoping that they actually would find my place. Not that it would ever be connected with this, because there's no source of ignition in there. There's no fuel been left behind, anything like that. So because they're only going to be looking within the devastated area to try and pinpoint the origin point of the fire, they're not going anywhere near my place. I'm going to say that's a good half a kilometre from my little home.